So, hello everyone. So I'm very happy to be among you like this. It's okay. And I thank you for it. So I've been in charge of the research since 5 years, and I am co-author of the book Rez de Ville that David Mongin introduced you this morning. And I'm just going to continue the presentation of the book and by sharing with you what we have called a duty of reinvention. So for this duty of reinvention, we divided it in two parts. First, the need to identify itineraries, daily itineraries, and make a distinction between residential street and busy streets. And secondly, we created some spatial categories to define urban ground floor projects. So instead of thinking of term of what in French we call circle of accessibility in relation to a busy transport hub, it would be better to define itineraries by their specific properties. So the first method on the left is an abstraction, and it's favor density while excluding sometimes many streets that are inhabited. So to integrate new projects within a space with multiple points of attraction, we have to think in terms of what already exists and the street that people use every day between between homes, schools, transportation centers, and works. To develop a walkable city, we propose to design streets that adapt to the environment that they are passed through. So there are a multiple of possible itineraries between 2 points, depending on neighborhoods, towns, and streets. But it's also depending on people, on their age, on their mood, and also on the amenity they can find on the roads. So all of which are marked by their personal necessity and habits. So we would like to make a distinction between busy street and residential one. Here, in the top, it's Paris, and in the low, it's Lyon. And you can see in red busy street and in black, the residential one. So quantitatively, the residential streets are far more numerous, and often there is unhabitable in the ground floor. So for perspective of a walkable city, it's interesting to rethink the uses of residential ground floor to make them more habitable. The distinction between a busy and residential street will enable us to design different patterns of road sections, and each pattern can adapt to various itineraries. So we define two categories for the residential active one, and we had some measure of how many we can had on the frontage between in front of the facade. Here we are just making a test because at the left side you can see the typical design of a French housing estate. So there is a lot of mineral ground for cars, and there is no really relation between all the houses. So we make some tests to develop density and to reduce the permeability of the ground. So in the middle, this is a test with stone patches, and on the right, residential alleys with high density and more permeable ground. So in order to change the approach to the new project, it's necessary to go beyond the construction of itineraries. We need to look beyond the facade and better define the threshold that exists between public and private space. This painting by Johannes Vermeer is the perfect illustration for us. We see depicted different fronts, different atmosphere, and they are all visible from the street. Each of them creates different degrees of privatization and accessibility, but they all coexist and they all interact with the streets. So this painting was a great source of inspiration for us, and it has enabled us to define spatial categories of the urban ground floor. We organized it, our objective, into three categories. First, the frontage, second, the porous, and after the deep. and they all have different relation with the streets, and I'm going to explain them. First, sorry, this is the frontage. So here we think that we need to plan them at urban scale to have continuity, and they are going to be the link between the city and the streets. The measurement of this frontage will define, sorry, the hierarchy of road types and the diversity of the uses that we can put. Secondly, we have the porous measure. So this is going to help us to create visual and physical permeability requires with an architectural scale. Porosity must be considered in junction with accessibility parameters. And last, the JIP that be considered at the scale of blocks or plots or buildings. It can help to building depth, and it should give more width to the frontage by using courtyards in back. For deep spaces to be properly managed and made accessible to the public, architectural programming on the ground floor must be mixed. For example, here in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine in Paris, the whole long artisanal courtyard are now open to the public because they had on the ground floor workshops, offices, commerces, and everybody can enter on, and it's closed for the night. All the methodology points that we are proposing are prescriptive but adaptable. For a walkable city, we can use the canonical dimension of 100 meters. Blocks, sorry, that allow for an acceptable economy of road and networks. But we are using this dimension so that everyone can get an idea of the scale to compare, but it can be variable. For reasons of economy and safety, more and more atrium buildings are built with a single entrance and on their 100-meter facade. So that makes the street less lively and less hospitable. So to make the streets more lively, it's essential to redivide the blocks and make them more crossable. And after, when we can multiply the interest, we are going to put the spatial categories, frontage, porous, and deep, in order to open up access to areas within blocks. Here there is a little history of the courtyard sizing and uses in France. And we saw that at the beginning we have the big courtyard, and after, until Haussmann, it was cut in a little courtyard. And for the development now, we have like open blocks, and they are making some crossable blocks with courtyard, but instead of because of the propriety, they had fences all around, so it's absolutely not crossable. So the courtyard is one of the best devices, we think, to integrate deep urban ground floor. The shapes and the size of the courtyard can be accommodated in variety of location. They can be a long and narrow, square or rectangle, but they can accommodate housings with fronts of gardens and also offices or workshops. A certain mix is possible by this form, and even it's necessary. Developing mixed use courtyard has many advantages. It will ensure accessibility during the day, provide a feeling of security, and also create a distribution of using according to the orientation of the sun in the courtyard. So it can also be a walkthrough and open on the back streets, allowing the multiplication of urban itineraries. Implementing these categories may involve regulation, recommendation, and negotiation, depending on the situation. But the aim is, above all, to vary the possibility and find the right combinatorial system that adapt to be surrounding urban environment. And so here we can add some different possible combination that we can create. We are just going to talk about the David Chipperfield project that I've just completed in Paris. So the entire block has been redesigned around 3 courtyards and a passageway linking the boulevard to la Seine. And here, this is some pictures of the ground floor. And because of the architectural work, it's very open urban floor. It's only all crossable. I'm just going to present you 2 agency projects. So the first one has been completed and incorporates the notion of itineraries. It's built in the 70s in the heart of Paris. It's the Forum des Halles. It's the largest infrastructure ever built in Europe, and it's spread over 5 underground levels. And it includes a multimodal transport public hub, a first-rate retail complex, public cultural leisure facility, and sports amenities. For the project, we decided to restore the urban continuity to an area stretching from the Louvre and Palais Royal until Centre Georges Pompidou, with the aim of reintegrating the Halles into the shape of major public spaces in the center of Paris. And you can see all the itineraries that are created. And the second one is the Montauban Joint Development Zone. It's located in the southeast of Toulouse, in the south of France. And it's all around the historic aviation runway. This 40-meter wide track could have been an obstacle between the 2 neighborhoods surrounding it, but instead, to link these 2 parts of the city, it was decided to create a series of itineraries that connecting the district with most attractive points. And now the runway is no longer appears as an obstacle, but much more as a link. And this is a picture of the evolution. So at the left, the first phase of the district is now complete. And you can see in yellow the floor with amenities. So at the beginning, this implies that it's difficult to build underground parking lots because the district lies on the land with a very high water table. So in order to avoid additional infrastructure costs, the developers wanted to place all the parking lots on the ground floor. This idea would have been a disaster for the nearby public space. So we negotiated with them and we integrated service shops, community center, sports, etc. on the ground floor in order to liven up the central square of the district. And at the right, this is the second phase, and it's also, we are also in working on, and for the second phase, we develop a staggered urban system pattern with building that open on all 4 sides and oriented to provide noise protection from the highway, natural light, and attractive views. To address the parking issue, we decided to create slender plants along the highway. This is going to reduce noise pollution and from in the neighborhood, and it also frees up a right-of-way for the construction of common areas linking to the runway. To liven up the runway and the staggered buildings, we have integrated the 3 categories of urban ground floor that's going generating multiple depths. For each of these thicknesses, we have defined a set of recommendations to be respected by each architect's lots to guarantee the continuity of the urban ground floor. First, for the frontage, we recommended using only vegetation to manage boundaries. And we made a distance of 4 meters from the runway to be left to create these frontages. High fences are absolutely prohibited, and they must be at least at 8 meters from the runway and must not exceed a meter in height. The staggered are considered as porous, and all the landscape recommendations are made to ensure that this area remain cool and shadow. And the amenities that we can find in it for residents, and it can be accommodated in the space. Porosity also needs to be addressed in conjunction with the architecture, and we promote some opening building that can be provided. Yeah. Finally, the depth will be spatially arranged with crossing or courtyard, and the courtyard will be used to reduce the size of lots that are not staggered. This will also allow natural light and promote natural ventilation, and that different uses can be integrated to animate them, like private garden, offices, workshops, sport amenity. So to conclude, obviously, such recommendations are required a certain legal amount of legal work. The municipality has defined that the public right of way that ends at the fences. So maintenance of all these spaces are their responsibility, and beyond the fences, the staggered areas will be the responsibility of the lot owners. To allow access to crossing the building and to go into the yard, public utilization or right of way easement will be required. So building the ground floor is not even easy. It's require urban work, architectural work, and also a legal issue. And tomorrow, Marie Petchikitov is going to show you the importance also of the representation of the urban ground floor.
Thank you, Soraya.
Welcome.
We have some time for questions.
Yeah. Good morning.
If I may actually start out on the courtyard side, the first part of your presentation, when we talk about porous or accessible courtyards that really draw functions into the block and have various diverse uses other than the residential garden or just the exclusive space for the residents, it seems like oftentimes this necessitates very high density development, because it's something that comes as a retrofit. A lot of these really interesting courtyards of Paris are 1,000 years old, that they have layers and layers and layers of opening up, and now they have become extremely intricate. The question is how to do that in new build projects today, because oftentimes when we do, especially residential blocks with courtyards, there's a tendency, obviously, for the residents to want peace and quiet and calm, and block out anybody coming in. So what are some of the lessons, I think, in doing the urban design work in France and convincing the developer and the community to have open courtyard blocks? Famously, of course, when Paris experimented in the 14th with open courtyard blocks, it didn't go that well. I mean, the Potsdam Park blocks were an experiment and then kind of stopped after that.
Yeah, and there is a lot of experiences in the dense city that we have shown, but we think that we also can produce courtyard in suburban, but it could be common areas for the residents. Actually, in France, when we build, when we are building a building, in the ground floor, we don't put any common use, any housing, nothing. There is only like technical locals, and it's absolutely don't livable, and everybody is live up. So to link to the streets, we need to open and to programming this the urban ground floor. But maybe you, yeah.
Can you get back to the schemes about the evolution in Paris? We came to the point of the courts because I'll do it again. The housing blocks in Paris, they start by an imitation of the Roman palace. Then they divided in two, divided in four plus one, and then it was too dense, so they open it for the housing, big housing project, social housing project. Then in the 70s, they tried those kind of blocks, and then the very invention is made by French architect, Christian de Potzenpart. He invented the open block. We call it the open block. And the open block, the idea is to have the advantage of the street, continuous street, but also the modern advantage of having site and having huge building and small building, kind of a diversity. And here's the area that we can cross it. And a lot of new projects since 20 years, they tried to, it didn't work, because at the end, the people doesn't want that they cross. So we must admit this, that because the co-ownership is very difficult to accept, even that the scholars cross the blocks. So the idea to get back to the court, it can also, because during the COVID, a lot of people was living around the court, and they were very happy with that, because it's about 20 flats, and it's a dimension that you can have a kind of a neighborhood which works. We must admit it works better than this one. I do it very quick, but this is the idea. So I think we must get back to the idea of the court, which can be dense, because in the old neighborhood in Paris, in the Faubourg, it's not so dense, because they still have some row houses on the back coming from the rural thing on the craftsman guys. So you manage to make living the thing.
It's interesting to me also that in Paris, the open block is considered an invention. In the US context, it's the perimeter block is something that's pretty rare. Like in Boston or Cambridge, we hardly have perimeter blocks because everything is an open block.
I'm just going to add to that. There's in the US, actually, the public spaces that have failed usually are ones where it's ambiguous as to whether it's public or private. Nobody quite knows what the rules are. Trying to be both. And there was many years ago a book by Serge Chemaev and Christopher Alexander called Community and Privacy. And they argued that in fact there's a group public and group private spaces. We're subtle kind of distinction, but they have to be marked. They have to either it has to be clear when you're moving from something that's public to private. It's not that you can't have private space that used by people, yes, but in fact there has to be signals that it's it's not the same as the space that is through public. And I wonder whether those kinds of distinctions
about Rez de Ville, about urban transport. What is difficult is that we are so much obsessed by safety and by juridic on trend and so on. And if we start from that, well, we can go to sleep and for nothing. So the idea is to make a step forward, an expression. And afterwards, if you have ideas and can be convinced that in a court, some people have advantages and they can live together, I think the legal things can move. For example, what I said this morning, and sorry, okay, when you have those courts, if you also can have functional mixity, which take a little bit of social mixity, because you can have a watchman and very different people working on different things, and you can have accessibility. So it's not like other buildings with a code and so on and so on, because people have to go there. And the safety is made by the code surveillance instead of the video surveillance. So we must cross different systems and find different parameters together, find solution which all these constraints are found together. This is my proposal.
Very interesting work. It really reminds me of Dutch structuralism, right? Where they really start to look in between spaces. The Dutch have, I must admit, have stepped back from it quite a bit for the reasons that Gary has mentioned. Research has proven, including research doing myself, is that people want to negotiate their own relationship with the city. They want to be the owner of the porous spaces that you mentioned, versus having that ownership kind of thrusted upon them. Let's put it that way.
Yes, but if you do it in the beginning by a proposal of a court with a mixity, you can manage to do it. What the people doesn't want is that if they are in a situation and a new building is coming in front of them. So this is very well. So, but you can propose models, different kind of codes, a little bit scale for different reasons.
Thank you, Soraya.